Well, Jim, we briefly mentioned it before. Let's talk about Dark Side of the Ring, the finale of part 1, or I guess the first half of season 3.
First half of season 3. That's the way we're going to say it.
And the big episode focusing on the Dynamite Kid, a wrestler who you were a big fan of before you got into the business.
Oh, my God. Well, and here's the thing is that we see so much of this falderall now, but it wasn't done in wrestling basically because nobody could do it and pull it off believably. The kind of shit that Dynamite Kid started doing with Satoru Sayama, the original Tiger Mask, in those matches, just as people were starting to get VHS machines. And at that time, in the United States, there were no main event matches broadcast on television. It was all studio shows, or even the companies that had gone to arena tapings, like Crockett about 80, 81 with the Nemo truck, and when World Class moved in the Sportatorium, blah, blah, blah. You weren't seeing main event competitive matches. So the Japanese tapes were already a hit with the huge hit with the underground, wrestling fans here in this country that were already kind of with the business and tape collecting and program collecting and etc. So when you saw that, if you watched 70s lucha in Mexico, you would see flying like that, but there was nowhere near the level of appearance of struggle with the lucha stuff. It was just all pretty acrobatics. And there was not necessarily, and in lucha in the old days, they did some mat wrestling, but we've talked about the lucha style evolved with the rolling bumps and the thing because those boxing rings in Mexico were harder than Chinese arithmetic, and you just couldn't take bumps on them. And then you saw with some guys in the United States like Billy Robinson, Tony Charles, Les Thornton, Ted Heath, the British influence with the World of Sport style, the ground-based mat wrestling. You never saw all of that put together in such a way as you still didn't lose the effect of a contest, and it didn't look like obvious cooperation. But there was wrestling, there were high spots, there was lucha, there was flying, there was everything. And these guys were just two of the most amazing physical specimens in wrestling to be able to do it. That's what, and I think Edge said, the young guys that wanted to be wrestlers, they watched these tapes and it looked like they were on speed search. It wasn't necessarily even what they were doing, but the precision and the perfection and the speed. And at the same time, looking like the other guy was trying to stop them from doing it instead of cooperating with them to do it. So it was the right pairing of the right guys at the right time. The only reason it happened is because they had a lot of money invested in Tiger Mask. Inoki's company did, New Japan. They had found him as a young boy, and they thought he was a prodigy, so they sent him to England to learn World of Sport. They sent him to Mexico to learn lucha. And he worked all around the world, and then he came back and they put the Tiger Mask gimmick on him because that was a huge cartoon character at the time in a comic book. And they figured it would just be for the kids, but they had to have smaller guys that could fly to work with him. So they started bringing in the luchas, and they started bringing, and then they hit with Dynamite, a young British kid, well-versed in World of Sport that I'm sure Sammy Lee and Dynamite had probably wrestled in England. And that was what made the magic. So that's what got both of those guys. Tiger Mask was going to get the big push anyway. But when they found Dynamite, that was the perfect opponent. And what did they run with that for 2.5 years until basically finally the Bulldogs went to the WWF?
Well,
didn't come back?
No, they ran with that until Sayama quit New Japan.
That's right. He quit first.
He quit New Japan and he went to form the UWF with Akira Maeda and Shinma and everyone else. And then eventually in 84, Davey Boy and Dynamite, I believe shortly after Stu sold Stampede, they made the deal, which was pretty significant. Got major coverage. Yeah. They jumped to All Japan. So now you had the British Bulldogs in All Japan, and then they quit Vince. So they were just doing All Japan, and that's when Vince had to go over there and work on a deal to get the Bulldogs back. And the front page of all the weekly magazines was Vince and Baba shaking hands, which infuriated Inoki, who was paying, $1 million for the rights to use Vince's talent.
Right.
And here's Vince and Baba shaking hands on the cover of every magazine over the Bulldogs.
But they were a commodity, and it was, again, because of Dynamite specifically. But anyway, you put the guy over, the performer over. Everybody has always talked about and had stories about that he could be a miserable prick as well outside the ring. But there was a lot of guys here that they had an all-star cast: Jacques Rougeau, Danny Spivey, Mick Foley, Lance Storm, who's a tremendous resource. Scott McGee, who you haven't seen or heard of in 30 years.
He was a tremendous
one of his best friends. He was tremendous. He was really legitimate and honest. But then it's not as simple as it seems to say that, well, Dynamite was a prick outside the ring, but was a great talent in it, because apparently he was a great guy outside the ring too in some instances, until the substances, and who knows whether it was concussions. There was no CTE back then, so nobody was looking for any symptoms. How many concussions would Dynamite Kid had to have had? Dozens?
He was doing that headbutt off the top. He did it. Didn't he do it once in Portland from the top rope to the floor?
Yeah.
Diving headbutt?
Yeah, and again, that's another story I've told with Danny Davis and Ken Wayne. Wrestled Calgary, came back to Memphis, said, yeah, there's this guy, Dynamite Kid. He's a British kid from England. He'll stand tiptoe on the top of a ladder. They'll push the ladder over. He'll come off the top of the ladder, bounce off the top rope, and fly over to the fucking floor in one motion. He's amazing. It's incredible. He's probably going to end up in a wheelchair. I swear to God, I heard that in 1980. So, who knows what just like with Benoit, just like with anybody, that does these things later on in their life. Was it concussions? Was it drugs? Was it steroids? Here's the only thing that, and we'll talk more about this show, but I'll talk about for a second what it didn't have. And I think this was just timing, 45 minutes without commercials, but they started the show with him as a wrestler in Calgary, as a fully formed adult in the wrestling business. Nothing about his childhood. And we've read the book, Pure Dynamite. He was poor in England, grew up dirt poor, struggling, an undersized kid, became a professional wrestler in the 70s when he was 15 years old or whatever, got shit kicked out of him because he was big around as a goddamn drinking straw, but had that determination and overcame all that shit and finally got a chance. Remember, the story's been told when, what was it, Ross Hart? Or was it Bruce? Either one. Told Stu, hey, we've seen this kid in England and we got to bring him. He's the greatest wrestler in the world. It was Bruce.
It was Bruce.
And Stu's like, okay, trust his sons. And then here shows up, and it was, and same thing with Davey, a year later or whatever. Here shows this emaciated kid that's, that big around, and they're, what the fuck? And he's, no, this guy's going to change the business. And that's where Calgary got ahead of the rest of the North American continent with really hard-hitting, more technical, faster-paced stuff, as well as the wrestling gaga, because it was the style that a lot of those guys could do, and it fit, just like the Von Erichs determined the style in Texas. What the Hart family and or their various marital relations could do determined the style there, and so that's where they picked it up. But that's the drawback, is that you didn't, because I mean, a lot of the shit in Dynamite Kid's childhood could have made him the person he was for good or bad as well, and we didn't hear any of that. So I know it's time limitations, but holy shit, you started in the middle there. I missed the first part of it. Danny Spivey looks 80 years old these days, doesn't he?
How about that vein sticking out of the side of his head?
Yeah. Well, anyway, was it me? The one thing that they glossed over also and didn't even go back and show a replay of, right before they talked about, they went into Dynamite being a prick, like when he dislocated Cactus's jaw the first time he touched him in that job match in the WWF, and when they halcyoned poor old Mitch Snow and shaved his head and his eyebrows and shit in his bag. And I remember Mitch Snow from the Carolinas. He was a nice young kid, but he didn't need to be consuming alcohol or anything, drinking or being anywhere near the British Bulldogs. But they glossed over the sacrifice bump at WrestleMania 2 and didn't even really mention it. And then they go to where his back snapped in Hamilton that year. But the WrestleMania 2 sacrifice bump is what started that, right?
I don't know for sure. And for the record, WWE's cameramen missed that sacrifice bump because you see Dynamite get hit and go flying off frame.
But you could have gone back and said, watch Dynamite, and put the lighted circle on it and played it in slow motion. For those of you who are completely going, what the fuck are you talking about? The finish of the WrestleMania 2 match so that the Bulldogs could win the belts was the old Anderson Brothers sacrifice, where Davey Boy ran, whose head was it?
Maybe Valentine?
Was it Okay, ran Valentine's head into Dynamite's head. Like, Arn Ole used to haul off and grab a babyface and run the babyface's head into Gene's head. And it was a sacrifice. I'm sacrificing my brother to win the fucking match. But when Dynamite took it, he was standing up on the second rope, leaning over the top rope. And when the heads bonked, he just went backwards and took a nasty plunge, not off the apron, but off the second rope, flat of his back to the floor. Because it was WrestleMania, and he was Dynamite Kid, and that's the kind of thing he did on big shows. The cameraman missed it. Apparently, Dynamite just thought, well, it's TV, they'll shoot it, or whatever. But so you barely saw it. But I had heard at the time that that's what started giving him serious, not that he wouldn't have had back trouble anyway from everything else he'd done, but that was a serious deal. And then they showed the footage, the VHS tape of the house show footage. Somebody had a camcorder where he was going into the heat spot. He hits the ropes. Heel drops down. He's going to hit the ropes in front of the heel partner, and the heel partner's going to give him a knee in the back. But when the guy did the drop down and he jumped over him, they didn't make this clear, but this is what happened. When he jumped over the guy, he felt his back snap. And he tried to stay up and make it to the ropes. And you can see him turn, and the heel went with a knee and didn't even really hit him, but he just crumpled in pain because his back had snapped from jumping over the guy doing the drop down. It
was Morocco, wasn't it?
Morocco. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back. It was something that anybody would do. It's like when, Nash got in the ring that time and fucking took 2 steps and tore his quad. It was just time for it to go. It wasn't anything that you would have thought, but that's what put him out. And then they removed the discs after the surgery. And then it was a big story in wrestling at the time, not in, well, I don't know. I get the smart fans knew about it, but we all knew in the locker room when they fucking basically brought him back and had Davey help him to the ring so that he could stand there, and they turned the cameras on, and Jimmy Hart nails him with the megaphone, and he's down on the floor, and Davey gets beat. So they get the belts off of him, and then they carried Dynamite back out, and he went back home and got back in a wheelchair. But that was, in those days, not only was that the dedication that guys showed to dropping a belt or to putting another guy over or get, not fucking up the booking, but also the promoters didn't think anything of that in those days. And publicly traded company or no, I've had situations where guys have been hurt and offered to do something. I said, no, we can do it another way. I don't even know if I, as hard-hearted as I am, would have done that one and said, no, let's get you out to the ring some kind of fucking way, carry you. But so a lot of guys in wrestling knew about that at the time, and they knew he was pretty much fucked from that point. Even though he came back, it was never the same, and that's where he started having there'd always been stiff ribs, and there'd always been, he was that hard kind of guy, but then all the issues happened in the year or less that he was back after the surgery and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he dropped the titles. They had him back at WrestleMania 3, which was still too early for him to be back, but they were able to hide some of his weaknesses. It was a 6-man match. And then it was really 88 that everything fell apart.
And now, help me on this, since you are a wrestling savant, because Jacques Rougeau, I loved. He's a French Canadian, right? We've talked about the French Canadians. We love them. But he even says, I had a little bit of arrogance. Maybe I'd like to joke. People take it the wrong way. But the instigation for the whole thing with Dynamite or the Bulldogs and the Rougeaus, but specifically Dynamite and Jacques, was Hennig's rib, right? With the clothes?
That's right.
And they didn't mention that. But wasn't it Kurt had taken a razor blade in the locker room, which they used to do, and zipped up Davey or Dynamite's suit jacket or something?
I forget what he did, but the story I had always heard was Kurt Hennig, who was known as a big ribber, who had just gotten there a little while before this to the WWF, pulled a rib on Dynamite, made it look like it was Jacques, and then Dynamite reacted the way he did, which was to...
Well, yeah, I don't even know if he made it look like it was Jacques or just led them to believe that after the fact. I remember it was something to zipping the suit with the razor blade, because what you do is you take while the guy's in the ring, his jacket's hanging there, you take the razor blade, and you cut it, zip it, where when the guy puts the jacket, you can't tell when it's hanging there, but when he puts it on, it's fucking hanging in goddamn ribbons, right? And then the natural thing, especially if Dynamite got hot about it, visually hot and not in a good ribbing way, but the natural thing was whoever it seemed like it would be, let's fucking put the attention to them. So if already Jacques and Dynamite had been making little comments, then all Hennig had to do was go, well, boy, it's an awful long way for that guy to go, even if he said some of those things. And then you planted it. How do you know it's him? Well, I don't know. I just figured. And then you just go on. And then it starts fucking festering. So then the way Jacques told it, he was told to come in the locker room and sit down and play cards. I heard that Davey just fucking walked up without any warning and just fucking... Dynamite, rather. Walked up without any warning and just fucking whacked him, and he didn't know it was... Either way, he didn't know it was coming, and he got shit kicked at him. So then that's where the roll of quarters came. I'm glad that Jacques Sr. got the credit for that. That used to be a great angle, too. The roll of quarters, and you leave the end open so that when you throw the punch, it'll fly out the fucking tube and everybody sees the quarters. But anyway, so yeah, 4 teeth, down he went, fucked him up.
Well, no, he actually, in truth, he never went down. The story always was that was one of the stories he got.
He went down to pick his teeth up.
I don't know. He got hit. He was bleeding. His teeth went out. But the story was always that he didn't leave his feet. That he didn't get knocked down.
You may have me there. But anyway, a lot of people got in the middle of all that stuff. But that's basically, they had to do something. They couldn't have both those teams in the same locker rooms. And what was they left both of them off for a little while, but was it that they couldn't get Dynamite to say that he wasn't going to try to kill Jacques? Or how did it end up that they eventually fucking fired the Bulldogs, or the Bulldogs just left?
Well, no, the Bulldogs quit. Really, at Dynamite's request, they quit. Davey, I think, wanted to stay. Davey didn't want to go, and Davey ended up going back a year and a half, 2 years later. But what happened was, after the incident, Vince brought them all together, I believe, because they were about to work on opposite sides of a Survivor Series tag team match, where it's like five teams on each side.
So they had to have the sit down so there wouldn't be any goddamn bloodshed on television.
And there wasn't. They worked together that night, and that was the last night the British Bulldogs worked for the WWF as a tag team. And then they went back to Calgary, where Dynamite was going to be the booker and they were going to do Dynamite versus Davey, and they did. One of the problems was Ed Whalen didn't really want to see that feud, so a lot of it didn't air on TV, which I know it sounds crazy, but that's literally what happened.
The TV announcer, because he was a big shot and had gotten him hooked up with the TV, he could take shit off TV if he didn't like it. So in the latter years, it fucked up a lot of their best angles.
But that's what happened. Dynamite left the WWF. That was the last time fans ever saw him on a mainstream level in the United States. He worked in Calgary. He went back to work for Baba with Johnny Smith. And then he retired a few years later. He had that comeback. They had the footage. I still have the commercial video from 96, that Michinoku Pro six-man tag match.
Well, hey, hold on. Before we get there, there's one piece of information here that I love that I had never heard before. And I loved Jacques' reaction to it, where they said that Dino Bravo had warned the Dynamite Kid's family. He had warned the kid through the family not to fuck with Jacques Rougeau. Am I saying that properly? Because Dino Bravo, everybody knew as to what happened later on with him. He was hooked up with the shady people in Quebec. I don't know what they call the mafia in Canada. But the warning, I'd never heard that story before. And then Jacques claimed it was a stooge test, which is great and something that Jacques would do. Because the story that the kid's family got was, hey, this well-known mobster in Quebec will kill you if anything happens to Jacques Rougeau. And so they were all like, what the fuck, right?
Although the one thing with Jacques' story, with it being a stooge test, there's a little bit of a difference between them thinking Dino Bravo's relaying information from Jacques to what Dynamite's ex-wife said, which was Dino was the one threatening us. It was going to be Dino doing it. That's where maybe Jacques doesn't want to admit that, yeah, we knew who Dino's friends were, and we were going to take advantage of it.
Well, but here's that Dino may have been the one delaying the information to them. But I thought I can see this happening because I've done this to a couple of people, and we've talked about a few of them, including Mr. Terry Taylor, who flunked everybody flunks the stooge test. If you have to give somebody a stooge test, they're going to flunk it. But I love the way Jacques said, I just wrote a name down on a piece of paper. I said, see, I need to call this guy every night. If I don't call him, something's going to happen. And he could write down fucking Jimmy Hoffa or Al Capone or any name he wanted to write. As long as they're all Canadian, they'd all recognize the name. I can see that happening. I liked it anyway. But then they went to his home life was chaos. His wife was unhappy. The big fight happens when she gives him basically a plane ticket to England, says, go back and leave us be. This can't work. And then that's when he got the shotgun and pointed it at her head in front of the kids and whatever the fuck. And can you imagine what he must have been going through? Because if you go back to England, you've got 2 kids and another one on the way in Calgary, and you never straighten yourself up or out or whatever well enough to ever go back. He never went back to Canada again. And that, and like you said, then they had the footage of that comeback in 96. He was skeletal. It was pale. It didn't look like the same person. I would have to think that just they were trading off of Michinoku Pro was one of the early outlaw companies in Japan, and they were small time.
Well, no, this was a big show because what they did was it was a 6-man match. And again, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was Dynamite, Kuniaki Kobayashi.
Yeah.
And I forget who the third
Kid
person
Kobe
was.
is what his nickname was.
Against the original Tiger Mask Sayama, the great Sasuke, and I want to say Mil Mascaras.
I think it was.
But I can't remember who the third opponent was right now.
But that's what I was about to say before you so rudely interrupted me. They were a small-time independent outlaw promotion in Japan, but all of a sudden they put together this fucking generational dream match with all these fucking guys that have been major stars at different points, different places in Japan. But do you think they had known what Dynamite Kid looked like when they booked that, or what do you think they thought when that skeletal apparition showed up instead of Dynamite Kid?
I was pretty regularly getting the Japanese magazines around that period of time, and I was pretty informed, and maybe there's something I don't remember, but I don't remember too many photos around that period of time before that appearance popping up about Dynamite Kid or for Dynamite Kid.
Because I remember seeing the tape, and the first thing I thought was, oh, fuck, he's going to die soon. It wasn't the same human being.
It's funny, real quick.
That was sad.
Real quick, this just came to me. I remember my disappointment as a 13-year-old when I'd read about Michinoku Pro in The Observer, and he would describe it as the Smoky Mountain Wrestling of Japan.
Oh, God.
I didn't realize that meant that it's a regional promotion. I thought it meant like, wow, they're doing angles and interviews and all this stuff on TV. And, you get the tapes, and I was enjoying some of that stuff. I liked a lot of those guys at the time, but there were no angles and promos. But when I read it was the Smoky Mountain Wrestling of Japan, that's what I thought.
Can Uncle Dave please start looking at the camera? Please. I mean, he's good. He has background on all this stuff. He was around. This is before he had lost his mind about wrestling, so he has good takes on these things. But please, he looks like he's being grilled as a fucking potential perp in a goddamn criminal investigation. Look at the camera.
His eyes are always darting around every one of these things. I did notice that as well.
Darting around, back and forth. Very shifty. But anyway, then finally, they mentioned Michelle, his ex-wife, mentioned that during the Benoit era that she finally spoke out about some of the things that had gone on between them and that the kids had found out. And then that's kind of sad because one daughter went to visit Bronwyn, went to visit him in England. The other one didn't want to. So he finally apologized to her there, but, still, that's kind of a fucked up situation for everybody involved. And then he was in the wheelchair for not long after probably the Michinoku comeback until, how long's it been now? What was it, 20? When did he pass away?
Not that long ago, a few years back, right?
So it was quite a while that he would just,
Remember there was a video that popped up, I don't know if you saw it, maybe a year and a half before he died. It was him and Sayama on a video chat. And the original Tiger Mask was so excited. He's like, hello, Tommy, and they're talking to each other. Dynamite could barely move. Like, he was barely twitching. Like, there was nothing happening. And it was the saddest thing ever.
So anyway, that is the close of part 1 of season 3 of Dark Side of the Ring. And there's going to be some good stuff coming up, including the episode at the second season. We'll try to have dates and information on this as it becomes made available. But Bruiser Bedlam, Johnny K9 is one episode. They're going to do the steroid trial, and they have interviewed Jerry McDevitt. This will be interesting. And several others we're going to be interested in. But boy, oh boy, isn't it funny also how many dramatic and or dark sides of the ring coincide with the people involved in Calgary, the Hart family, Montreal, etc. That whole periphery there. That's
and Texas.
A variety. And well, Texas was, but I think there's more intersection here now in Calgary and Montreal and the screw job than there is from the Von Erich tragedy.
How about Vince in the Brett documentary? As he, what did he say? As he calls it, the screw job. Like, he wouldn't even admit what it was.
Well, also because Vince had never heard that terminology before either. There was no such word, as I've said many times, in wrestling, inside wrestling, as screw job. It was a fuck finish. Screw him if you're, more prudish or there's somebody around you don't want to hear you cursing. But that was a double cross, what he did. So he says he calls it the screw job because that was instantly. Brett said he got screwed, and the fans that wrote the sheets at the time had come up with a terminology of screw job finish, so that became the Montreal screw job. But actually, Vince would theoretically say it like that because it's not a real wrestling term that you would have used in those days. Just a clarification.
All right.
Oh, but you know what? You know what, Brian? I can't help but think that if people could just be in better moods and be happier, that some of this stuff wouldn't happen. And I can't think of a happier thing to do than retreat into yourself in your own world, not have the hustle and bustle of city life around you, not have people nattering at you all the time, annoying you, being able to listen to what you want to listen to and either learn or listen to music and be entertained or be uplifted by a positive podcast like ours where we constantly want people to reach for the stars. And the only way you can do that really by shutting out the outside world and listening to what you want is getting a pair of the Raycon wireless earbuds. That's going to make all the difference, folks, because whether you're working out or you're taking a trip or you're just spending time outdoors, walking the dog or petting the cat or chasing the mice or whatever you may be doing, work or play, if you're on the move, take your Raycons with you. A pair of Raycon wireless earbuds in your ears gives you crisp, powerful beats, as the kids say, at half the price of the other premium audio brands. They look great. They feel even better, come in a range of cool colors. They'll pair up with your blue teeth. See a dentist if they get too blue, but they'll pair up with your blue teeth. They have 24 hours of battery life on a charge. They're portable. You can stick them right in your pocket or wherever you hold things that you hold dear. And right now, Raycon is offering 15% off all of their products for our listeners right here only. And here's what you got to do. Go to buyraycon.com, BUYRAYCON.com/JCE. That sounds violent. There, you're going to get 15% off your entire Raycon order, not just one set of earbuds, not just two, but your entire order. You'll grab a pair and a spare, and maybe even some more after that. 15% off at buyraycon.com/JCE.